Several years have passed since this happened. But sometimes I think about this night and wonder what it was that I saw. So, first, a little about me. This happened when I was 17, right before I started my last year of high school. I think it was the first week of September, and I was about to start school the following week. I can't say for sure though. But I do remember sitting on my bed and watching Netflix while kind of daydreaming and checking my phone every so often to see if I had any new messages. My door is right to my left, which leads down the hallway. There is only one window to my right. Now, I can see my whole backyard and the woods beyond it from this one window. No one in my family lived in town. We lived out in the woods, but not so far out that we couldn't do anything or see anything. I don't think we're more than 10 or 12 minutes from town, and the area around our house was all woods. Just so you know. I don't know how many acres these woods are or how big they are. I only know that it was just woods and that we moved into this house right before I started middle school, when I was probably 13 years old. I didn't play in any of them. I don't spend much time in the woods. I've always been more into video games. So that was kind of where I put my attention. So, I'm sitting there mindlessly watching Netflix, and I remember that I had my window open. My room tends to get very stuffy very quickly, so I wanted to let some air in. So I was enjoying the cool breeze of early fall, and I thought I saw something move to my right. So I turned my head, and for a split second, I thought I saw something white moving far away. But when I turned around and looked, there was nothing there. So I kind of just shrugged my shoulders and went back to doing what teenagers do, like watching Netflix and checking my phone. Now, a bit of time had gone by. I couldn't say exactly how long it had been, but I saw movement again, which caught my attention. You know how when you see something move out of the corner of your eye, you just look in that direction. This was like that. I didn't have to give it much thought. So I turned around and looked, and I did see something crawling on the ground. It was big and white. So, I got out of bed and went to my window to get a better look at what I had seen. I remember thinking, what the heck? Again. I'm looking out my window at night. It's dark, but there's a moon out. It's not a full moon, but there's enough moonlight that I can sort of see what's going on. I can't see where this white figure or whatever it was went. I thought it might be the neighbor's dog or something, but when I looked for a minute or two and squinted, I didn't see anything. Then, just as I'm about to turn around and go back to Netflix, this thing kind of climbs up over the hill at the very back of the land, where there's almost a dip down into the woods. If you sat in this dip, my window wouldn't be able to see you. But if you climbed over it, I could see you, and I don't know how this thing got down to that dip and made itself invisible. When it moved over, I could see it a lot better, and what I saw scared me to death. It looked like a person, but their arms and legs were all broken and bent, and they were naked and very, very pale and crawling on all fours. Their movement was a bit random, and it looked like they were skittering like a spider. They moved very quickly. They weren't coming in my direction. Instead, they were more or less moving north along the tree line. I couldn't see the face well, but I could tell from the shape of the head that it was a person. It didn't seem to care about me, my house, or anything else that was in my direction. If I had to guess, I'd say this thing is no more than 80 feet away from me at most. I'm kind of just in shock, and I see this thing scattering, and then it kind of goes down the dip and disappears again. I just kind of stand there, stunned and trying to figure out what I just saw. So, in a panic, I slammed my window shut and pulled the curtains shut. I threw myself on my bed, threw out my phone, and looked up white figure to try to find out as much as I could at the time. The results, to say the least, were horrifying. Everything I read about this creature called a crawler matches exactly what I saw. The limbs were bent and broken, and the body was pale and sick-looking. Very human-like man. I can't tell you how scared I was at that moment. This was the stuff of nightmares. I'm just sitting there thinking, isn't this supposed to be some kind of creepypasta or something? But now I'm seeing it for myself. I just turned off the TV and waited for this thing to come back to the house. I thought it would be one of those scenes from a horror movie where you hear it outside your window, pull up your blinds, and it's right there in your window. That, however, never happened. I didn't see it again after that night, and it didn't look like it ever came near our house. It seems to be trying to get somewhere. I might have just happened to see it as it went by. But I'm telling you now that if you see one of these things, you'll know it. There aren't any animals or creatures that look like this. Did you know that there is no animal that looks like a human and crawls around on all fours, pale, and naked? That just doesn't happen. I haven't seen or heard anything about this either. In fact, I've only heard of creepypastas. I don't really listen to scary stories or anything like that. So this was my first time going down horror lane, and as I said at the beginning, it happened a few years ago. But I've been thinking a lot about it ever since. I mean, when something like this happens to you, it never really goes away. It always wants to hang around in your mind. How do you feel? Do you think I saw a crawler or was it something else? Everything I read led me to that conclusion. So I just wanted to make sure that's what it was by asking you. I guess it doesn't matter much anymore because it happened years ago and I've never seen a point to it, but I'd still like to know what happened. If you do read my story and people comment on your video, I will try to read if I can, and I would love it if anyone could comment and tell me if they think this was really a crawler. So, here's the deal. My brother and his friends just came back from camping by the creek. It's been about a week since they were there. When they got back, what they had seen scared them to death. They said that big hairy things were following them around while they set up their tent. I should also say that my brother is very serious about science. He's no nonsense. He doesn't believe in anything, even things that science hasn't necessarily proven. So he doesn't buy much of this religious or supernatural stuff. He has always been very smart, very analytical, and a show me the evidence kind of person. I would never have thought he would come to me and tell me about his life. But he also loves to go camping and spend time in nature. A few weeks ago, he and some of his friends decided to go camping by the creek. They have done this kind of thing before. I'm also very close to my brother. So, he tells me pretty much everything that goes on. He told me that they had been out there since the evening, and as they finished eating and were getting ready to set up their tent, he started to feel something strange. When I asked him what he meant by sense, something strange, he just said that there was this feeling in the air that he couldn't quite put his finger on, like things had gone from being safe and peaceful to dangerous and possibly harmful, if that makes any sense. That's how he told me about it. But he didn't care because he was busy eating his barbecue. I don't think he told me that he and his friends felt the same way, because that's just how my brother is. He didn't bother telling his friends about it. So they started setting up their camping gear. The next thing I know, he's complaining to me that he starts to feel watched and like there's a big predator nearby. Those are his words. He says he heard and felt like something was watching him, and that he even heard movement nearby. He kind of wishes he had brought a weapon with him. At first, he thought that someone was watching them and was going to rob, kill, or steal from them. He didn't want to tell his friends anything because he didn't want them to be scared. So he kept quiet and made sure he was ready in case something happened, but things quickly got worse from there. After setting up the tent, they sat down by the fire, where he could see that his friends had gone from being calm and laughing together to being very tense and quiet. They are looking around nervously and darting their eyes back and forth, as if they, too, were waiting for something. Both my brother and his friends must have known, but neither of them is talking about it. When they were both very quiet, they heard a low, guttural sound. He said it sounded like a low rumbling, but he could tell it was a growl and knew it was an animal. He didn't even know what it was. He told me it was something he wasn't ready to deal with. Soon after, whatever this thing was didn't hesitate to show itself, and it did so at the right time on its own schedule. Now, my brother didn't say exactly when or how it showed up, but he did say that it showed up as his words and that it was the ugliest, most evil-looking thing he's ever seen. Then he and his friends were so scared. They left their camping gear where it was and ran as fast as they could back to the car. Even though my brother is very smart, he's not the fittest person. He's not fat, but he's not very athletic, so for him to sprint because he hates exercise is really saying something. Before he could sit down and tell me what happened, it took him a few days. He didn't really ask me what I thought it could be or what happened. I just told him what happened to me when I went there the other day, and he seemed pretty scared about it. Even as he was telling me the news, you could hear that his voice was shaking and cracking. As he talks about what happened, I could see the real fear on his face. I think it was hard for him to explain to me what he saw, like he couldn't get over it. I think this was a real wake-up call for him. I think it's hard for him to believe that there's more to the world than what science tells us. It's strange that we live in a world where only a small part of reality is accepted, even though there's a lot more out there than science will admit. How do you explain all of these strange things that people have seen, like the paranormal, Bigfoot, dogma, and so on? These people can't all be crazy, right? There can't be one big conspiracy of all these people working together to make up fake encounters to push a story, and there are more and more people like my brother who stick their heads in the sand and finally have to face the fact that there are things we don't understand that are outside of science, religion, society, and the way most people think. There's a word for this, by the way. It's called cognitive dissonance, and it's definitely what my brother is going through. I don't know if he'll be interested in the supernatural now, but I think it will make him much more open-minded. I felt bad that he had to see or do whatever it was that he did. Maybe this will make him more understanding and less quick to judge things that aren't exactly right. I did not have any answers for him, which was a shame. Thank you for reading what I wrote. My friends and I went camping in the spring of 2017, and it was an experience we will never forget. Back in Pennsylvania, we camped at a place called Little Laurel Falls. It's not the most popular campground, but it's pretty far away and not many people go there. We chose to take a walk. One of the late nights we were there, around 3 a.m., we happened upon an old mining site that had been abandoned. It was where people used to get coal from the hills nearby. It was pretty spooky to be there with all the old wooden buildings and stuff that had been left behind. So we kept walking until my friend said he had to go to the bathroom. I went with him because I had to. We were walking together behind some nearby bushes when we heard a loud howl coming from close by. We ran out quickly and were like, what? Maybe one of her friends is just messing with us or pulling a prank on us. I think we kind of agreed and nodded, just to make light of the situation. We went back to the campgrounds, where everyone was awake and talking about something they thought they saw on their way back from the bathrooms. They saw something run across the path in front of them, but they thought it was just one of us messing around. I didn't like the thought that whatever it was got so close to us without us knowing, as if it had been watching us from the woods without us knowing. Well, we went to bed, and later that night, the same loud howl woke us up again. I say again because this wasn't the first time, and it scared all of us. I thought this was a good time for us to all pack up our things and leave as soon as we could. As we were getting ready to leave, we talked about what we had heard, and we all agreed that this was not something we should mess around with. We quickly packed up the tent and threw everything into the truck. Then, out of the blue, our friend Billy started screaming. He was standing by one of his bags and just started shouting as loud as he could before running over to us. We all looked over, and I still can't forget what I saw. No, everyone? Even now, this big creature about 8 or 9 feet tall is still standing by the truck. Its whole body was covered in this dark fur, except for its face, hands, and feet. It looks like a person, but the head is like a dog's. Everyone was so scared. We didn't know what to do until I suggested that we start throwing rocks at it. I know, it's strange, right? But when you're in a situation like that, you have no choice but to act on instinct and fear. So, without thinking, we all grabbed a rock and started throwing it as hard as we could at this thing, but it didn't even move. It just stood there for a second before charging at us and roaring loudly. So, we all ran to get to our cars and get out of there as fast as we could, but this thing just stood there and watched us leave. We all thought it wouldn't let us leave until we drove away, and when we got back to the main road, that's when we stopped the car and got out. Still, we were very scared. We could see this well because it was right next to us. If I had to tell you, it would be as big as a bear. It had big paws like a dog's and short, sharp claws. It had dark fur that looked brownish-reddish in the light. It was also quite strong. It just stood there and watched us for a long time before turning around and running back into the forest. But it doesn't end here. This went by so quickly. No one could really get a good look at its face or eyes. I do remember seeing something similar in pictures that a friend from home showed me. He told me that this thing is called a dogman and that people have seen it all over the United States. We've been trying to learn more about these creatures, but so far we've only learned that they exist. Well, other than this online encounter, I was really hoping that we would be fine after this. But what happened after that was something we will never forget as long as we live. So now we're driving away from the site, and we see a few of these things standing by the road. It looked like they were just staring at us as we drove away. All of them, including the smallest one, stood upright and they had the same canine head and paws as before. This was super creepy. I don't know if I could go on living if I knew these things were real. They didn't follow us. They did nothing but watch as we left. It's really strange. Sad to say, I don't camp as much as I used to, but I'll never forget this trip. If you want to know more, you could do a Google search or watch a video on YouTube. You should be able to find out a lot about these creatures, though. Just don't try to get close to them. You don't want to hurt yourself, so good luck. Oh, and I'm sorry that my post is so long. Hopefully you understand. I just wanted to get the word out to everyone. If you have any questions or comments, please leave a comment on this post and send me a message. I would like to add one more thing. Even though these things look dangerous, I don't think they wanted to hurt us more than they already did. Just make us scared. I still think so. Please just be careful next time you're camping. The Temperance River trails are in fact one of my favorite places to hike in Minnesota. This morning, it is a day-use park on the shore of one of Minnesota's biggest and cleanest inland lakes. We walked along the lake and woods on the southernmost trails. On our way back to the parking lot, the sun was shining and there was a light breeze. We walked for about an hour and a half before going down a hill. Just as we got to the bottom of the hill, there was this strange being about 20 feet in front of us. It was running through the woods near the trail, and then it jumped up a slope and into the trees. I'd never seen anything like it before. Its body was very stocky and covered with dark hair. It moved so fast that we both stopped in our tracks. When I saw this, the whole thing lasted less than 10 seconds before it jumped up the slope and disappeared into the trees on the other side. I don't know what this thing was, but I know it wasn't a person and it wasn't someone dressed up. The only thing I could think of that was about the same size was a bear, but this thing ran on 2 legs, moved much faster than any human, and, unlike a bear, moved very comfortably on 2 legs the same way a person would. If it wasn't a bear or a person, what could it be? Well, it also had very long hair that was kind of shaggy and untidy. It didn't look like it took care of its hair like a person or a costume would. In fact, it looked muddy, dirty, and grimy. I've heard that Minnesota has a few stories about forest creatures, but I've never believed them. In fact, when we went camping, it was my brother's first time ever camping. Crazy. Right, he knows why I like camping so much and has finally shown an interest in going camping. He usually plays video games a lot, so he spends most of his time in a small office streaming on Twitch. He only wishes he had brought his camera with him so he could take a picture of this thing. It was definitely weird to see this. I know that there are more things out here in the woods than you might think. Sometimes it shows us that we're not as alone as we thought. Again, not as much as people think. This happened at the south end of Temperance River State Park in Minnesota. If anyone wants the coordinates or wants to check it out on Google Earth, I'd be happy to give them to them. I'm not sure if this kind of thing happens anywhere else around Temperance River. But after what we saw today, I would definitely think twice about backpacking down that section myself. I don't know if we saw something or what, but I've never seen anything like that before, and I spend a lot of time outside. So I guess I should count myself as lucky. But I am completely sure of what I saw. I left my trailer in the woods in the early morning of a fall day. I had never seen anything like this before. But let me tell you about it. Well, I guess first, let me tell you a little bit about me. I've always been a hunter. I grew up around different kinds of guns, knives, and other weapons, tracking animals, and all the dirt and grime that comes with that. I am very familiar with the woods. What happened this morning is as follows. I got up early so I could drink before going to work. I'm having trouble with drinking. I don't mind telling you that when I finally got out of bed around 5 a.m. It was very cold, around 30 degrees, but the sky was clear and beautiful. That morning, the stars were still bright and clear, which isn't unusual for that time of year, and there were no leaves on the trees. Anyway, to make a long story short, I'm still drinking alone at this terrible hour. My wife is going to see her mother because of a family emergency, and she's not getting pulled over for being drunk. So I went outside to drink and smoke when I saw something strange in the woods. Across the road was a clearing surrounded by trees, so there was almost nowhere to hide if you were walking through there at night. But out of nowhere, this thing that looked like a demon or devil from an episode of Supernatural appeared in the field. The thing was almost as dark as pitch black, but not quite. It looks like a person. It has two skinny arms and legs, and it was sort of hunched over as it walked across the field. When it turned its head toward me for just a second, I could have sworn it saw me standing in the doorway of my trailer. It looked right at me, piercing my body and soul, and then just kept going into the woods on the other side of the clearing. As if this thing just walking through the field was a normal thing to do on any other day. No big deal. I won't lie, I have been drinking a lot, but what I saw that day is something I will never forget, no matter how much I drink. No matter who you are, things like this will make you see them. I know this sounds like nonsense made up by a townie, but this is really what I saw. What this thing was, I don't know, but it wasn't a person. It looked like some kind of hell-born demon. But keep in mind that I'd only seen it once before. I saw it again that same night, around 5 p.m., when my wife got home. I guess her car was giving her trouble, so she was using her mom's car. So I got out of the car to meet her, but I couldn't get rid of this feeling of dread. I had the feeling that something bad was going to happen, as if I had a premonition. It didn't help much either. When it got dark around 6 o'clock, it was time to leave. Even the trees around me started to look darker than usual. I was feeling a little lonely around 7 p.m., so I went outside to smoke a cigarette. It seemed like ages before the sun finally went down that day. At about 8:30 p.m., my dog started barking like crazy in the backyard. There was no way anyone could have gotten in without telling him. I just went outside to see what he was barking at to shut him up. Even before I got halfway across the yard, I saw this thing again. The way it walked across the field and darted around scared me. It was so scary how it looked. It made me think of something from a scary movie from the 1980s. This time, though, it didn't seem to notice me, so I quickly brought my dog inside and we stayed there. I was done with this thing. I told my wife about it when she got home from work the next day. But she keeps telling me I'm crazy and that there's nothing for deer or owls to do in those woods. I remember what I saw both in the morning and at night. It really happened. Out there, there is something. Some kind of ghost, demon, or other thing. I have no idea what it was, but it wasn't a person. It wasn't possible. I could have sworn that person saw me standing there again the other night. It looked straight at me as it walked into the woods on the other side of the clearing where I first saw it. I have no idea what this was. I'm not interested. This has nothing to do with how much I drink. I'll say it again because no matter how many times I say it or how much you drink, you won't get it. I've seen the things more than once, and I've seen them all. It just stares at me. Even though it's been a few days, I'm still having bad dreams. I can't sleep, because it keeps coming back to me. All I can see of it at night is its dark black eyes watching me. It makes no difference. Now that I've told someone about it, it might go away on its own. But if there are demons, this is one of them. It reminds me a lot of the demon from the movie Insidious. Actually, I would really appreciate any help you could give me. Thank you. Camping is a great way for family and friends to spend time together. It's also a great way to get away from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. All the details of studying, going to school, and going to work can be too much for the human mind to handle. And this is why we need to let down our guard and enjoy nature the way we were made to. Not every camping trip is this great, though, and this would show me and my family that even more on the day we saw it. I think we were in Williamson County or close to it. The sky was clear and there were no clouds. When we got there, the sun was up high. Keep in mind that I was only 12 years old at the time, so I don't remember much more than what I'm about to tell you. It didn't take me long to set up my stuff and get used to my little spot in this cool campground. My parents wanted to see another part of the park, so they left me alone for a while, at least until it got dark. They thought I was old enough to take care of the fort by myself, and I told them I could do it. Now, it was hard to hear what was going on around me. I thought something was wrong with my surroundings. And until then, I had never really felt alone or vulnerable. I was pretty at ease and sure of myself out here by myself. Even though I had a machete with me, I was very naive and ignorant when I was 12. I didn't know how to keep myself safe if what happened had happened. Worse and worse. But anyway, this feeling kept getting worse as I heard strange breathing sounds just beyond the trees. The sounds kept getting louder and louder. And just when I thought they would stop, it seemed like they were getting closer to me, and the next thing I knew, something big was coming from far away. Its body was low to the ground, and its arms and legs were long and thin, like spider legs. It had this white greyish fur all over its body, but most of it was very thin, so you could see the muscles underneath. Not necessarily what I saw, but what happened, struck me the most about this whole thing. This thing had these yellow eyes. Even though we were about 30 yards apart, they looked at me with a kind of grim look. Give or take. It made me feel very unsafe, and now I'm ready to go get my parents because I can't take another 5 minutes of this. But no more than 10 feet away from me, I see two more of these creatures that look exactly like the first one I saw. These two were a bit smaller, but when they came out of the trees, it looked like they were just curious and not trying to attack. But they were bigger and stronger than the first one I saw. But, as I said, they are smaller and thinner, and as they went around me again, they seemed to move more like people. All of this was most likely no more than 30 yards away from me. After what seemed like an eternity of these things just staring at me and not coming closer, the main one. Finally, my parents came back to the campsite with a flashlight. They went into the trees for a moment, and when they came back, I thought they had caught one of these things. But as soon as they came out, they were gone, with no sign of them left behind. The light was too far away for anything to be seen clearly. But when they got to my campsite, they told me that people were shouting around the campgrounds, but it wasn't anything dangerous or wrong. Just a group of drunk people. This was very close to where I was camping, and I thought I might have heard this. But that didn't tell me why I saw other things. I mean, it was clear that these things were from another world because nothing on this plane of existence could move as fast as they did. I'd love to hear what other people think about this or if they've seen anything similar. In fact, let me show you a few more details about how these things look. Their entire bodies were white, including their fur or hair. They had a very thin body. They seemed to be able to smell things very well. I could hear them sniffing the air around them, and I could smell a lot of different things. They were only 2 feet tall and very thin and long. Some were bigger and stronger than the others. Their heads looked different. They didn't look like humans, bears, wolves, or anything else. It was different. They had small ears on top of their heads and, more importantly, very big yellow eyes with pupils that looked like cat's eyes. I can't even think of an animal that looks like them, but it scared me a lot when I was 12. As far as I know, I have never read a description of something like this. I know that when I first heard about this, people told me about Bigfoot and Yeti, but from what I know, those creatures don't fit at all with the descriptions I'm giving you. So I'm not sure what to do. I can say that since this happened, I'm much more aware of my surroundings when I go camping, and I try not to go deeper into the woods than I have to. Since then, I've been thinking about this. I'm not sure if you'll believe my story, even though I'm sure you've heard stranger ones, but I hope you'll listen to me anyway. Okay. So, one night after work, I was driving home around 6:30 p.m. I was driving about a mile and a half east on Pleasant Hill Road toward Highway 164. There, the road is curved, and on both sides of it are forests. I was going around a fairly sharp turn when I saw something standing next to a tree on the south side of the road, close to the shoulder. It had 2 legs and looked like a person, but it was very big. It looked like a wild man, but it was probably between 13 and 14 feet tall. I mean that this thing was huge. At first, I thought it was a game, but then I did a double take. I was right next to it. It happened. I saw it for about 3 seconds, which told me it wasn't a trick of the light, or my imagination. I was going between 50 and 55 miles per hour, and it stood there for a few seconds before stepping back into the forest's shadows. I could see that he was big and strong. He had broad shoulders, long arms, and big hands. I couldn't make out much more than that, though. When I saw the light, my heart dropped, and I pulled over right away to call my dad. I was freaking out because I thought I had made it all up. I was shocked when my father called me, and asked me what time this happened after I told him what happened. I told him it was about 8:30 at night. He said he had heard about things like what I had, but not exactly like what I had heard. I wanted to go back, but every time I tried or got close to the spot where the sighting had happened, my dog would start to whimper and act scared. It was as if our dog could sense something there. He is a German Shepherd, and he is a very guardian dog. So that's pretty scary for him. I hope you'll listen to me because I've been wanting to talk about this with someone for a long time, anyone who will listen and take me seriously, but I've been afraid of what might happen if I do. I don't know exactly what I saw walking out into the forest that night, but the whole thing still scares me to this day. I didn't think things like this existed, but I guess I'm very wrong. I hope you can find peace in this world even though you know there are scary things out there. But at the same time, I know all too well how hard it is for you. Please don't be afraid to get in touch with me if you have any questions. This year, on December 9th, I went camping with a few friends. We drove about 30 minutes outside of town and set up camp on a bridge from which we could see the beautiful night sky. As it got darker, we thought it would be a good idea to look around where we were. There were a few roads off the main path that didn't look like they had been used much in a while. The one we thought was worth checking out is called Gutman Road, or so the locals say. It is said to be where a man with the body of a goat used to live. As we walked down the path, I saw something big in the weeds on the other side of us. The only way I can describe what I saw is by saying it was like bending your knee backwards. This thing was bent over and was all black. I told the others what I had seen, and they started laughing at me and calling me names like idiot and crazy. My friend just told me, "There's no way you could have seen a goat man." I kept telling them that I saw something out of the corner of my eye, and it wasn't like a normal animal. When I started acting weird, they rolled their eyes at me and kept walking. I wish they hadn't gotten rid of me so quickly, because that's when we heard footsteps. This thing comes out of the woods, and we've never seen anything like it. It was probably between 6 to 7 feet tall and had a goat's head. It was dark in color and had really long arms. It didn't even wait a second before it started to chase us. We quickly got back to our camp. It started walking slowly, and just before we got back to the bridge, it kind of disappeared a few seconds away from us. Still, it kept following us, and it felt like there was no way out. I don't think I've ever been that close to dying in my whole life. And all I could think about was the thing that was after us. I'm not sure how long we were on the bridge, but it must have been at least 2 hours. We could hear this thing walking around, but luckily it never got too close to the bridge. After all that had happened during the night, the sun had finally come up, and this thing that we had seen seemed to have gone back into the forest. For now, we will never go back to that bridge. I know this sounds like a story I made up, but it's what happened to us. I don't know what it was, but I know it could have hurt us if it wanted to. That's where I'd like to start. I've met some strange people out in the woods when I was by myself. Let me tell you about them. But first, a little bit about me. I'm not crazy. I'm pretty sure that cryptozoology and the paranormal are real. So, if anyone knows what my possible encounters were, please let me know. I like being outside in nature. So, of course, I've always had this thing for old graveyards and empty buildings. I'm the kind of person who likes to spend a lot of time exploring in the woods. Why do I say this now? Because I think all of these things have to do with the same thing. Me going urban exploring and trying to find old, broken down buildings I thought were empty. In fact, the first time I saw one was about 4 years ago when I was walking back to my car from a local graveyard where I had spent some time alone. To say I was alone is an understatement, because there's no one around for miles, and this place is so far out in the middle of nowhere that no one could have been walking around back here. As I always do, I was walking along the river. It's kind of my way to wind down. The riverbank drops off a little ways up from where it bends, on a path worn down by people hiking up to the power lines. They are making it easy to look over the edge and watch the water flow. I saw someone at the bottom of the path, sloshing around in the tall grass. It looked like a man in all black who was just walking along the riverbank. At first, I thought it was just a hiker who got lost and ended up deep in a nature preserve, which is something a lot of people do. But as I watched the figure cross the river and move toward my side of the river, its head went into a grove of trees, and I saw that it had horns. At this point, I want to be very clear that it was not a deer. It had horns that stuck out of its head about 6 inches or so, and its head and face were very cow-like, with a long white nose and a very long face. From the trees it went under, it must have been at least 8 feet tall. First, I thought of a minotaur. I stopped looking at it because I thought that if it knew I was looking at it, it would only be more curious and maybe come over to talk to me. I was careful about where I put my feet the whole time so I wouldn't fall in the river and draw this thing to me. When I looked up again, it was gone. No one had walked on the grass route I was walking on, so I hadn't gone through the woods to get out. I couldn't see where it could have gone besides down to the river. I didn't know this kind of animal. And the only thing I can think of that makes sense is that it was either a minotaur or a demon. I know it sounds crazy, and I really hope there is someone out there who can explain it in a way that makes sense, because I can't. Now. The next time I saw it was a few years later. I was walking back to my car and investigating a different building at the same time. I remember that, as I said, I love exploring cities, even if it means going into old, broken down buildings that no longer stand. I'm not talking about anything like old haunted houses. It looked like an old funeral home in the middle of nowhere. I had a hard time finding real information about it, even from people who had found it by accident. It was sold, and it didn't look like anything had ever been there. It was getting dark when I got to the road. I wasn't carrying a flashlight. It wasn't easy, but I started looking for my car. Nothing was visible. I always had the sense that someone was watching me. But no matter where I looked, I couldn't find anything. I looked for my car for about 20 minutes before I finally found it and parked it in the dark. I felt so stupid for not having charged my phone. If you are wondering why I didn't just use my phone, well, the battery on my phone was almost dead, and I forgot to charge it. There was no way for me to use my flashlight. It was very scary to feel like someone was watching me. I thought I was the only one there. It was a very unpleasant experience. I don't know how I felt or why I felt the way I did. But once I got in my car, the feelings went away. I still wonder what was out there with me that night, watching me try to find my car. The third meeting happened once more. About 2 years later, I walked along the river again, but this time I was with my boyfriend. I wanted to look at the river for longer, which annoyed him at the time. So he walked ahead of me a long way, leaving me behind. I think we just got into a fight. I really can't remember. I had just taken off my shoes and was letting the cool water run over my feet. When I saw something far away, I jumped off the bank and landed in the river about 100 feet away. It scared me, so I stopped to make sure I wasn't seeing things. After about a minute, I figured out what it was. It was the goat man, which was the same thing I had seen years before. And this time, let me tell you, it was very clear what it was. This time, though, it was on all fours and jumped from the ground to the river and back again, as if testing how well it could hold on to the rock. It looked like a man and had a lot of muscle. I couldn't tell if his fur was brown or black because it blended in so well, but I could see that his face had the same horns and a white nose. From across the river, He would look at me, but all I could see was this huge, huge body. And my said 55-year-old body wouldn't stand a chance against his. I was very cold. I couldn't yell or do anything else to get the attention of my boyfriend, who was now so far ahead of me. I don't know why I didn't start walking away to get away from it, but something told me that if I could see him, he could see me. I turned around and saw a small patch of woods next to the river, so I ran toward it. He kept looking at me, but he didn't try to get closer. I don't know how long he stood there watching me from the bank of the river and how long I stood there watching him. It seemed like forever. I don't know how to explain it, but as soon as this thing looked at me, I knew I had to hide. Now I finally felt safe. While I was in the forest, I hid from that thing while I waited for my boyfriend to come back. What happened, I told him. He didn't believe me. Again, we argued about it for the rest of the evening. He was angry that I had let him walk so far. I was nervous, but he didn't seem to care. He made it clear that all I did by making up that story was keep him from leaving. The next morning, I was ready with my phone to find out more about that place. That's how much the whole thing shook me up, and it still bothers me. What I saw, I know. I've written this story for a long time, but I've never really put it online. I didn't like it at first, but now I don't care if you call me a liar. I'll just ignore you and go on with my life. I do believe some urban legends, but I'm not sure what I saw that made me think that. I don't want to return to that river. I don't know what's out there at all. I guess I should have called this Goldman Encounters, but I wanted to keep my first-hand account as private as possible, and maybe pick a different name. I'm not going to say exactly where it is, but it's south of Louisville on the banks of the Ohio River. It's a big area where people go fishing and hunting. I can't get anyone else to go down there, though. They are all so scared of the stories about it. People talk a lot about Bigfoot and other things, and the fact that I've been scared twice by something that looks like a two-legged goat doesn't sit well with me. So, feel free to think I'm crazy or to believe any part of the story. I don't need to prove anything to you. This comes from my own life, and you can choose to believe it or not. I'm sorry it's not better written or more detailed. But I had never written anything like this before. The whole thing still bothers me because I saw it with my own eyes while walking down the same path I was walking before. Message me or leave a comment below if you want to talk about anything. Thanks for reading, and good luck to everyone out there in the world. This is not my own experience, but a good friend's. He told me about this a while ago, and when I told him I'd be happy to write it down for him, he agreed. This friend of mine is very smart, and he doesn't want any praise or attention from the story. He just wants to forget about it. So, let's get down to business. My friend told me that he was driving home late Saturday night from his parents' house. If I remember correctly, it was July, and a friend told me that he was driving through the Kettle River mountain range in British Columbia while he was there. Something on the side of the road had caught his eye. Even though it was dark, he could see a big animal running away from him through the trees. He said that the thing looked at him for a few seconds with two deep yellow eyes before it finally ran away. Now things start to get a little out of hand. He told me that the eyes were very big and had a color that was a little reflective, like a cat or deer's eyes, but much brighter. He had never seen eyes like those before. My friend stopped this car on a narrower part of the road so he could slow down and get a better look at what he was seeing in the trees. He wasn't scared right away. But as soon as he turned on his high beams to get a better look at it, it started to run away through the trees. He saw a dark shape in the distance, but the car pulled away so quickly that he never got another look. Now, I feel like there's one more thing I should say about my friend. He's been around for a long time, and has seen a lot. He's also dealt with some strange things, like ghosts and other things. But that's not important. He once met a deer that was acting very strangely, and that he thought was a skinwalker. I won't talk about this little side story of his for too long. But in the end, it was a Navajo spirit that had caused the strange things that happened. He told me that when they looked at each other, it would watch him from the trees. It would make a strange sound, as best as he could describe it, and the closest thing I could think of to describe it is if you took a bear and a wolf and put them together. It scared him a lot. I'll talk about that later, though. He waited until he couldn't see the shape anymore after he saw it run away from the car. He said that it was too dark to see its eyes, but he could still hear it running through the trees. He went to his car to get it going again. But he said that he went to his car to start it up again. But he said that through the trees, he saw more eyes looking at him. He didn't see them at first. He quickly figured out that there were more than one of these. The way their eyes looked in his car lights didn't make him feel too scared yet, but he was very interested in what he was seeing. One of these things is getting close to the tree line, so he needs to keep a close eye on his car. He said that it looked like a man with thick hair. He couldn't see its face, but he could tell that it was very dark from the top of its head to the bottom of its feet. It did seem strange that he drove that car. He could see it in the trees trying to watch him. It stood there and looked at him for a long time before taking another step toward the trees. As he sat in his car and watched, a few of them started to move out into the tree line. They started to growl at him, and act very territorial. He said that at this point, my friend started to feel scared, especially when he realized what these things were. He wasn't sure if they were dangerous or not, but he decided to drive away, and he said he's sure they followed his car all the way back to the main road. He talked to me for a long time about it. He said that he will never forget it. But these things scared him so much that he never wanted to see them again. Now, I know you might think he's crazy, but he came up with a very convincing way to tell a story that's pretty easy to believe. I don't know what to make of it all, but I thought I'd tell you all about his experience. He isn't looking for praise or anything else like that for this. He just wanted to show it to me after we talked about it at dinner one night. He says that he doesn't want to really believe what he saw or tell me about it. But it turned out like this. He feels like he has to tell someone what he went through out there. I never thought he would make up a story like this. I know he's seen some pretty shocking things in his life, but I'm not sure if he would make something up, but for now. Well, you'll have to decide for yourself if you think a story is true or not. I thought telling you would be helpful. So, that's how my friend told the story. And he said that he had never seen anything like these creatures. My friend also told me that when he got home, he felt very uncomfortable. He couldn't really say why, but he said it had something to do with what he saw that night out in the woods. For the next few days, he felt like something or someone was watching him from outside his house. He lives in the middle of the mountains, down a long gravel driveway. He is known to have had some very strange things happen to him. After what he did, I don't think many people up here would want to live out there and deal with what he does. He thought that something might have been following him even as he drove home on these lonely roads. So maybe these things, whatever they are, followed him in some way. It was only about 8 miles from where he lives when he saw it. I don't think there are many people up here, so they might be trying to protect the area or something. I'm not sure, but I do know that this has caused him a lot of trouble. My friend has always been pretty brave out in the wild, so he's used to things like this happening. This might have been more than just another one of these things. Maybe it's a god that was made by force or something. I have no idea. He says there are a lot more people in the woods than you might think, and he's sure these weren't bears because they were said more than once. They didn't look at all like bears. Do you know what he might have seen? This happened in 1989 or 1990, when we were camping by the river. I've seen my fair share of cryptids, but this one will be the one I remember the most. We were camping with our friends when all of a sudden our dog started barking at something behind us. We turned around to see what was going on. That's when we saw something we thought was a Bigfoot. It was standing behind a thicket of trees and staring at us with its arms outstretched, as if it wanted us to leave. When we saw this thing, what we saw that day scared us to death. We quickly ran back to our camper, locking the door, scared that it would try and break into our camper. We stayed up all night, and some of us kept watch by looking out the window. We didn't want to have to go through that again. We knew for sure that day that we had seen a Bigfoot. We did our best to forget it ever happened and didn't talk about it for a long time. We were too afraid to tell anyone what had happened. But that night, when we were in our camper, I'm not sure if it was Bigfoot or something else, but we heard strange sounds outside the camper. It sounded like rocks were being thrown at our camper, and then we heard heavy footsteps all around us. We couldn't sleep because this had been going on all night. We were at a loss for what to do. We were very scared that whatever it was would get into the camper. This thing would get closer each time, but when we yelled at it, it would still go away. We wondered if this thing wanted us to leave the river. We were camping on its land, so it would make sense that it would try to scare us away to get rid of us. We somehow, I don't know how, but we somehow managed to make it through the night unscathed. The next morning we woke up, went outside, and you could smell this horrible stench like I had never smelled before. It had the worst musty smell you can think of. Everyone felt like something was watching them from afar. It just didn't seem right for trees to be there. They felt evil and they gave me shivers just from being there for a day or two after. I couldn't get what we had seen out of my mind. I had also never been that scared before. And it took me a long time to get over being scared because of what we had just seen out there. I remember seeing one thing that might be considered as proof of this encounter. We were still in a camper when I looked into the kitchen sink. I saw that the right corner of our window screen had some deep scratches. It was almost like something had tried ripping open the screen to get inside but failed, and I could easily tell that those marks were not there before we had gone camping. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true, and if you ask me what I think about Bigfoot, I'll tell you I believe they exist. The next few days were quiet, and we couldn't smell or feel it anymore. We did hear it again, but this time we were more scared than interested, and we didn't want to go back there again. As far as I know, we were the only ones who saw this creature that day. We were pretty far away and all by ourselves. I had already told my other friends what had happened. They didn't at all believe me. So, I've always had to keep this a secret from everyone else. I don't want anyone to think about it. I'm crazy if I ever said anything in public about this subject, even with a lot of evidence in support of Bigfoot, since that in other places, nobody has tried to convince me that there is nothing to worry about out there in the woods, especially with them being around humans. This is what happened when I saw Bigfoot, and like other people, I still think it's not just a myth. Every time I hear about other reports or stories of Bigfoot sightings, I can't help but wonder if that was the same thing that tried to get into our camper that day. When I'm out in the middle of nowhere and have these kinds of experiences, I have to think twice about how everything has happened. All alone. I'm much more careful about where I camp now, and I'll never go camping by myself because I don't know what I might find. If I do look, it might sound crazy, but I never thought I'd find something like that in the middle of nature. It has really changed the way I think about nature for good. I had forgotten this happened until I heard one of your episodes, which brought back all the memories. It has been maybe 10 years now since all this happened. Most of the details are still foggy, but I'll do my best to recall them as well as I can. It all started with me and a few friends going camping up in California. We had camped in Shasta before, so we decided to do it again. It has great views and isn't too far from other places of interest. We would usually go out in my buddy's truck with all of our gear, sleep in that for a couple of nights and then sleep in tents if the weather permitted. This time, though, we tried something new. To save space, just a few friends and I would take his Jeep Cherokee, and we would all just pile in the back. There were 4 of us, altogether 2 dudes and 2 girls. Me and my buddy were 19 at the time. We thought we could do it by ourselves. We went up around 8 p.m. to find a good spot instead of setting up camp. We would be staying there until Saturday. The next day was a beautiful hot summer day. I'm not the best with time, but it felt around lunchtime when me and my friends decided to go grab some sandwiches from our cooler and head down by the water. We have been marinating in our own sweat from being so anxious to go fishing and a bit tipsy from a couple of beers we had opened earlier that day. We decided to head down to the water. As we ate and watched people fish from the shore, we saw something in the middle of the lake. It was either sandwiches or another beer or 2. It was only about 100 to 150 feet out, so it was hard to make out at first. It looked like a person on top of an animal about the size of a horse or a cow, but running super smooth and fast. The figures looked too tall for a normal man, who might be about 7 feet tall. I remember thinking that the way they were running was strange. It looked like the animal was running on its 2 back legs and keeping its balance with its 2 front legs. I kept seeing this thing get closer and closer, and it looked like it was coming right for us. I remember looking at my friend and saying something about how fast this thing was going. Then he turned to look out in the same direction I was. He both just watched in disbelief. We were too far away to see anything other than a lot of movement. As the figure got closer, I just remember thinking, what if this thing is rabid? What if it's some sort of bear? But no matter how hard I tried, I knew this wasn't a bear, even though bear hunting is very popular out here. So I've seen way too many as it got closer to us. The figure was still running on all 4s, but it was moving much more slowly than before. It was still shocked. My friend and I watched as this thing moved away from us about 100 feet. When we finally saw what it was, it looked like a man running on all 4s, but as soon as it went into the woods, it was gone. Now, this scared all of my friends to death. I was too, but I can't say that I was partly glad that whatever it was didn't attack us. We all went back to our camp, which was only a few feet away. We packed up some of our things and talked about whether we should stay or leave. I thought I was being brave when I said, "No, you know what? I'm staying. I'm sure everything will be fine." My friends just told me I was crazy for doing it, and then left without much more to say. They left quickly, leaving me alone in the camp for the rest of the day. The rest of the day and the rest of the evening would be fine as I tried to forget everything I had seen and done that morning. but the night would turn out to be a whole different story. I could hear a loud screeching sound outside my tent. I got out of my tent to find out what was going on, and as I was looking around, I saw what looked like a strange creature being 200 feet away, in the opposite direction from where I had seen it before. Long hair, that is rough and dark in color. I thought this thing looked like a bear, but the head was very different. Its face was a lot flatter, and its short snout had big teeth coming out of it. This was not the same thing I had seen before. This one was not like the others. When I saw it, I was completely shocked. I stopped for a moment, turned around to see what it was looking at, and then I ran back to my tent, grabbed my bear spray, and turned on the flashlight up on my phone. When I got back to this thing, it was almost at the edge of the trees. So I pointed my flashlight right at its face. The light reflected off its eyes, and that's when it realized how close I was. It went back the other way and ran into the woods. I'm sure it wasn't a bear. I've been camping for more than 10 years, and I've never seen anything like that. Can I just say that again? I also know for sure that it wasn't a Bigfoot. I've met many of them more than once in my life. This thing didn't look like a Bigfoot at all. I think there was some kind of code on it. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I got my things together and left as soon as I could after the sun came up. My friends and I should have left together. I couldn't take the chance of sleeping outside again. I also didn't tell anyone else about the thing. Not even the friend I was with when I left. Even though it sounds crazy, what I saw was real. It's too unbelievable to just brush off as a story or something similar. I can tell you that whatever it wasn't a bear. I will never forget it as long as I live, and I hope no one else has a similar experience. This happens in Ohio, in Salt Fork. We had spent the whole day skiing back and forth across the lake. We also had a few beers out there, but nothing too crazy. We decided it was time to go back inside because it was getting dark. We were almost at the end of this cove when we heard what sounded like a tornado siren. We thought it was just one of those warning sirens, so we decided to ignore it. As soon as I started skiing again, I heard my friend yelling at me from across the lake, screaming that there was something in the water. I asked him to explain what he meant. He kept saying that the answer is in the water. I didn't know what he meant until I saw something move in the water near where he was standing. It was 50 to 70 feet from the shore. What was in the water was maybe 16 feet long and had a brownish-gray color. It was heading my way. The wind kept blowing in our direction. Its face was visible because its head was out of the water. It looked like a grayish-brown mixture with scales and long things that stuck out of the water. It had black eyes that were small and round. It kept swimming towards me. I knew I wouldn't be able to get back before this thing reached land. so I decided the only thing to do was to leave as quickly as I could. I didn't tell anyone about this until about a year later. I was afraid they'd think I was crazy. On that day, we were the only ones on the lake. I'm not going back anymore. This is probably one of the scariest things I've ever done, and I've done a lot of scary things. This happened to me when I was 17, and in high school in an Ohio suburb. I was supposed to hang out with a friend this afternoon, but my girlfriend and I went out instead. We're just walking around a local park that has a lot of trees and talking to each other. Even though it was a sunny day, there were dark clouds in the sky, almost as if they were warnings. No one was in the park, which was fine with me when we got to this part with lots of trees and other things that made it hard to see. My girlfriend decided she didn't feel good and wanted to go home. I didn't know why, but I told her I was going to stay a little longer, and she reluctantly agreed. When she left and I was alone, everything kind of went quiet. I didn't hear anything, not even the squirrels chirping and all the other noises. At this point, my mind started to mess with me, and I felt like someone was watching me. I just couldn't get rid of that feeling of dread and paranoia, but I tried to stay calm by not moving. After hanging out for maybe 15 or 20 minutes, I finally decided to leave. As I was walking out of the woods, it started to rain, but that didn't bother me as much. It wasn't too cold, what I mean? After walking for a few minutes, I hear loud steps in the bushes on my right. I looked over to see what could have made them, but I didn't see anything. After a few more seconds of looking, I kind of just shrugged it off and kept walking. This part of the woods was a little bit more open when I got there. Again, I heard something coming from my left side. This time, it sounded like heavy breathing or panting, and it was getting dark because I'd been out here for so long. After the sound stopped, I decided I was a little scared. In contrast to what most people would do, I should try to find out where the sound is coming from. Well, I was creeping slowly, but I didn't see anything in front of me until something big ran by me so fast. I almost got hit in the face. When I saw it, I almost jumped back. There was a flat footprint on the ground with claws that were probably about 4 inches long. When I looked up, I saw this creature about 20 yards away staring at me. At first, I thought it might be a bear, but when I looked more closely at its face and eyes, I realized it wasn't. Even though I'd never seen anything like this before, I realized this was the furthest thing from a one. I had a strong urge to stay alive, so I started running as fast as I could to get away. I never once looked back. I don't know if it was trying to catch me or not, but I ran until I got home, which was more than a mile away. And trust me, it was a big deal for me. I didn't run much. When I got home, I knew I should never go back to that part of what's alone again. Like some kind of life-saving alarm. I thought it knew I was alone and would be easy to catch. No one knows how long it had been there watching me. But it knew I was alone and couldn't do anything. If it had caught me by surprise, I probably would have been its meal. When I think about it, I still get chills. I'm not saying for sure that what I saw was some kind of creature, but the fact that I've never seen anything like it before makes me wonder what it is. Even though we were only about 20 yards away, I could see it very clearly because it was a dark, cold night and there wasn't much light. I wish I had some way to record something. I'd love to hear what someone else thinks. A few weeks later, I did go back to these woods, but this time I went with a friend. So, no, I wasn't by myself. We didn't go as far as we should have. We can see the same area well, and whoever or whatever was there with me before seemed to have left. But what made it even creepier was that every tree in the area looked like it had been scratched and broken, as if something big had been there and left its mark. So far, this is all I've seen, and I hope nothing like this will ever happen again. Not even close. Your thoughts on this would be very welcome. This is a family story that I find very interesting, and I'm sure you would too. This takes place on my mom's ranch in the middle of the country. At the time, I was about 10 years old. Since my parents got a divorce when I was 20, I've been living close by with my dad. The land on my mom's ranch has always been interesting to me because it is miles away from any other people. As a child, I used to play there all the time. My mom and stepdad went away for the weekend, so I was home alone with my dog Wesson. It was Friday night, and it was about 50 degrees outside. A little after 1 a.m. I woke up to get a drink of water, but I couldn't go back to sleep. As I went down the stairs to the kitchen, West ran up the stairs going crazy. When I got downstairs, he was barking at the front door like nothing had happened before, and no matter what I did, he wouldn't stop. But as soon as I opened the door, he stopped talking and ran upstairs to his bed in my room. So not giving it much thought. After a few minutes, I went back to bed. Wes woke me up again by running to the stairs and acting the same way. I get up and go downstairs, but the same thing keeps happening. I really tried to sleep, but Weston started to get even and bark more. He did this for about 10 minutes before he stopped. So I thought, okay, he just wants to go outside, so I took him for a walk outside. Maybe this will help cool them down, or maybe he's just nervous. Plus, if I take him for a walk outside, no one will try to break in because my Great Dane will stop them. Now it was completely dark, except for the light from the porch, which was about 10 feet away from the steps. When I get to that quiet night, West starts barking like he's never done before, and then I see something big running away from me in the distance. It stops in front of the house, where it looks like the mother's well would be. I went to tell Wesson to get away from whatever it was as soon as I saw it. He's a big dog. But before I can say anything, one of the strangest things I've ever seen sits there again. It's a different thing, about 20 feet away, and it has the head of a strange goat, a muscular body, and big black eyes. If you looked into its eyes for too long, it looked like a person standing on two legs, with huge arms compared to the rest of its body. When West saw this thing, it took off running in our direction. I ran back home, locked every door, and tried to call my parents. I asked her why she didn't have a security alarm put on the property, and she said it had never occurred to her. She called the police to help me, but they didn't do anything. There were no crimes, and no one was seen breaking in. They just told her to stay inside, call 911, and wait for help if we saw this person or thing again. And that's just what we did. I can't even begin to guess what it was, but I do know that after this happened, Wes wasn't the same for a few days. He became much more defensive. He didn't want to go outside at night and would bark at every sound he heard, even if there was nothing there. I hope you can learn something helpful about this. Since I've always wanted to know more about what I saw, I'll just say that the two things I saw were very different from one another. The big one that was running away, and the small one that was right next to it. Both of them are different. I'm not sure if both of them are Bigfoot. I'm not sure. My grandmother tells me a story about her best friend from the late 1970s. She used to live in Diamond, Ohio, and once her friend came over after work to spend the night because she was too scared to drive home because she had seen something that sounded like Bigfoot earlier in the day. At the time, she was 8 months along. I'm not sure how much more she can say. She said it happened a long time ago when she was trying to sleep and heard something come out of the woods and scratch on the side of her trailer. She gets up and looks out the window, but there is nothing there. Then, something solid came over the solid back deck and tried to move the door handle. She was so afraid that she just laid there because she knew she couldn't get out. So, she said that the next day she went out to her back deck and saw scratch marks all over it and some strange animal fur stuck in the railing. Like I said, it happened almost 40 years ago, but her friends said it was not a bear or any other animal she had ever seen. She says that whatever it was came out of the deep woods, where there were acres and acres of land that went on for a very long way. At the time, it was all unfinished, and there wasn't much back there. She thought that whatever had come up to her trailer that night was bad and wanted to do something even worse. She was afraid to go outside because she knew it would be there waiting for her. She said that after a couple of nights, she never looked back and moved to a completely different town. However, within a couple of weeks, she realized that whatever was watching her wasn't from the natural world. She felt like it could have killed her if it wanted to, but she didn't know what its purpose was at the time. I think one of the reasons she's coming forward now is that my mom told her about dogman stories about 30 years ago. My grandmother remembers hearing them when she was a child, but she had long since forgotten about them or thought they were made up. Until then, this is easily one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me while I was camping by myself. I was visiting Wisconsin. Because of what happened, you could say that this is my survival story. I shouldn't have made it through this, but I did, and it made me stronger. even after all these years. I'm still much more careful and aware of what's going on around me. I'm also not nearly as naive or cocky about my safety. Just so you know, this is a long story, and I've really tried to write down every detail I can remember. Here's what happened. It was 2003. I went camping for a while in the Wisconsin wilderness. I took a handgun and a 12 gauge with me, but I left the 12 gauge in my truck, which is bad for this story. So I didn't bring it with me on this scary trip. I bought this gun to hunt deer, but I also thought it would be good to have something that could shoot if something came after me at night. Right? So I've always been the type to go camping by myself. I don't know why, but I just thought it would be fun to do. It wasn't any different this time. Well, I didn't really use a 12 gauge to hunt deer. I just thought that if I saw one close up, I would shoot. No one really had to know, right? That is, I would just eat it. I wasn't a beginner at hunting, and I knew how to stay alive pretty well. That's why what happened is so strange. Surprisingly, it hasn't changed how much I want to live. So I get there late in the day and it's probably about 5 o'clock now. I set up my camp on the other side of a big rock formation near a creek that ran through the woods. Now, this creek will be important in the future, because it runs for a long way and splits off into many different parts. This is probably about 50 yards from a nearby road. Also, it's summer. I told my friends where I was and how long I was going to be there. So if something did happen to me, they would know where to look for me or find my body. When I was done setting up camp, the sun started going down at 8:30 p.m. The rest of the night went on without much trouble. Don't get in the way. It was total happiness. At night, I sat in my camp chair and listened to the crickets and the crackle of the fire. Everything was great. These are the times when I feel most at peace when I'm camping. Nothing or anyone bothers you. It's just peace. I started to get some sleep. Just before 10 p.m., and I woke up again around 1 in the morning. It had started to rain and thunder. I was starting to worry that I would have to pack up my things and go home, but I can't drive home in this weather. So I just thought to myself, you know what? Even though a lot of the gear I brought isn't waterproof, I'll do my best to stay put no matter how hard it rains. A little thunder is going off and on, and it's raining now and then. But I'm trying to go back to sleep and put my mind at ease so I don't have to worry about my gear getting wet. I started to hear strange noises coming from the forest nearby, but I just thought it was probably a deer or something. I mean, I am in the woods, where there are all kinds of animals that make noise. I don't know why, but I felt like I had to get up and find out what was making all the noise. So I thought, you know what, I'll go along with this. I grab my gun and flashlight and head out into the woods. As I walked over to where the creek was, it started to rain even harder. I thought this would be a good place to just look around. I know that many animals in the forest come out at night. I thought you might have come to drink, since that was the sound I heard. But as I walk over there, I don't hear anything skittering or making noises, which means there probably isn't anything there. So I look around for a few minutes before giving up because I can't find anything. Just when I'm about to give up. At this point, I decide that it would probably be best to just go back to my tent. I didn't sing. Something in the woods was making a pair of glowing eyes that looked like they were the size of dinner plates. From what I could tell, the eyes are about 8 or 9 feet tall, based on how tall the trees are around them. The eyes then moved to my left and started coming out toward where I had set up camp. When it stopped for a second, it was no more than 25 feet away from me. My heart dropped into the pit of my stomach, and I could hear more loud thumping sounds coming from all directions. I take my revolver's safety off. I was all set. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't have to wait long, though, because whatever this was started to move into the clearing right in front of my camp. I could now see it clearly. All I can tell is that it looked like a huge monster with what looked like thick scales. It looked like something big, like a lizard. I mean, this thing was just horrible. It walked out and grinned at me as though it was happy to see me. It might have just caught its own food. It looked like it didn't have very big hands because it had a long neck and skinny arms. It was standing in a way that almost looked like it had a back problem, but it was still dark, so I couldn't see every little detail. It kept coming closer and closer, and I couldn't decide what to do. I didn't think twice before firing 3 shots at this thing, but none of them seemed to hit it, or, if they did, they didn't seem to bother it much because it kept coming at me like it didn't care about me at all, as if the bullets mostly just bounced off its skin. I fired off 3 more rounds, but that didn't slow this thing down at all. So now I have no choice but to not think. It's a case of fight or flight. I turned around and ran straight into the woods. I had to leave no matter what. This was my only real way to stay alive, and I don't know what would have happened to me if I hadn't done it. Most likely ripped off both of my arms and ate me like chicken legs. I kept running and running for what seemed like forever. But now I hear them following me from every direction. I was worried I was going to get flanked. I can't tell how many there are, but they sound like they're getting closer and closer. I'm running in the dark with only a flashlight and a revolver to help me see where I'm going. Keep in mind that I don't know where I'm going from here. I'm just trying to get away from that thing, and when I finally find the creek again, it's at a different point where it's a little deeper. So I had to wade through the cross. I reached the other side and realized that it would be almost suicidal to stop and sit here. so I kept going. I just kept going north and deeper into the woods to get away from them. Now, I'm dead tired. So I stopped to drink some water and take a moment to catch my breath. The thumping stopped, and it was just me. I don't know what these things are, what they want, or why they're following me, but I'm so scared I can't even think straight. I just passed out in the shade of a tree. Now that the rain has stopped for a long time, I can only hear a faint pitter-pattering sound. It got incredibly quiet. I could only hear my own deep breathing. I was quickly running out of energy. As I lay there, it's raining. I don't know how long I've been there, but now we're feeding and they seem to have stopped. I can only guess that these things will stop chasing me right now. I don't know if it was for good or just for a short time. I got up and looked around to try to figure out where I was, but there wasn't enough light. I mean, my flashlight was giving off some light, but it was getting dimmer. I tried to shine it around as much as possible to get a feel for the area. When I turned around to start walking, I heard a growl that sent shivers down my spine. Something big jumps out of the darkness and right at me. I didn't even have time to think about it before I grabbed my revolver and fired 2 shots into the face of the thing. I didn't even stop to see if it was dead before I started running again after it was thrown back. At this point, I don't hear or see any more thumping, but I know they were somewhere. I could still hear the leaves rustling, and the brush moving after them. I can see it, but I knew they were still trying. I think they were actually trying to be even sneakier. My lungs are on fire, I'm almost out of breath again, and I feel like I have no energy left at all. I can't move my legs fast enough to get away from these things. I had to figure out how to get out of this. I could always go off the main path and back to my truck, but that would take way too long. These things moved faster than I did, and they would eventually catch up to me. God only knows what made me decide that the best way to get away was to keep following the creek, but this time I would go very slowly so that I would make as little noise as possible. I was getting a little ahead of them, but I knew they wouldn't be too far behind for long. Then, I saw it off to my right. A downed tree that had been there long enough for it to have holes in it. I didn't know what else to do, so I jumped into the big hollowed-out tree to hide. I was hiding in this hollowed-out dead tree and waiting. Almost all of the rain has stopped, except for a very light drizzle. Now I can hear a lot of these things getting closer. They sounded a lot bigger than I had thought. I had my gun close to my chest and was ready to shoot. I was not going to die out here. No matter what they were, I don't care if they rot in hell. It didn't take long before one of them came into view near the creek. It walked back and forth and looked around a bit. I was sort of looking. Under the trees, it was pretty dark, but I could just make out what was there. This one had to be more than 9 feet tall, and it looked even scarier in the moonlight. I thought this looked like someone had put a dinosaur and a person together. Its body was very strong and covered in scales, and its tail kind of reminded me of an alligator's. The head was more like a human's. It had a snout, but it was very short. The upper part of the face and the shape of the bones were very similar to ours. The eyes and forehead are set in high cheekbones. Its face showed that it was very angry, as if it couldn't figure out where I was going. It kept getting down low and sniffing the area of the river. I just went across like it was trying to follow my scent but couldn't. Now, more of these things start to come out of the trees around it. They all look about the same size, but most of them are smaller. I could tell by its size and the way it was put together, the leader was this big one. It didn't take long before one of them passed by where I was hiding, which was only a few feet away. I had my finger on the trigger and was ready to shoot if things got bad. Then another one did it right next to me. It was close enough that I could see its scales, which looked more like those of a snake than anything else. They smelled terrible. They said it smelled like a mix of death and poop. Only these horrible bacteria stink. I don't even know how to explain it. I feel like roadkill doesn't even do this odor justice. Then, about 20 feet away, I saw the tail of another one come out from behind a tree. I hoped that they wouldn't notice me. It got closer and closer until it turned around and I could see its face. This one was even uglier than the alpha. Its eyes were even more slanted, and it made a horrible hissing sound like it was also angry. I didn't understand it. It seemed like they spent a few minutes looking for me, but they couldn't find me at all. After some hissing back and forth, they turned around and started walking back the way they came. As they left, each one was only a few feet away from me on either side. I had to stop breathing and pray that they wouldn't hear me. I hid in a log and stayed quiet for who knows how long, maybe another 10 minutes or so, until I finally got the courage to come out. I didn't know how long I had left or how much time I would need to stay alive. I was outside, and everything was so quiet. I pulled myself out until I was lying on the edge of a huge branch as big as a boa constrictor. I was trying to figure out what had just happened. I'm now physically exhausted, and the growling starts up again as soon as I move. I start to remember these things. I saw that these things never stopped trying to find me. They were on a mission. I'm trying to get back into this log, but my foot keeps getting stuck. I'm trying to get my foot in, and I hear this high-pitched scream and the sound of something big running right towards me. I thought that was the end. I'm a goner. I put my feet in and pulled myself up as quickly as I could, trying to get my head inside like a turtle. Too late. The thing that sounded like it was screaming at me was not even 5 feet from the entrance to the log. It put its arm all the way around the log and started dragging its fingers along the bark, trying to get a hold. Then it screamed again and started slamming its arm very hard against the log over and over again, breaking pieces of wood and making new ones. It saw me come in. Then I heard people coming to help it. I only had a few bullets slept readied in my chamber. Before I could finish that thought, a huge hole burst in this dead tree and it was ripped open, and I could see this massive scaly arm punching through and start frantically reaching around clawing for me. It wasn't long before the log was ripped wide open and I saw their faces for the first time, just feet from me, all trying to reach in and grab at me. One of them shoved his entire arm into the log, but he couldn't seem to find me fast enough. I, having just barely enough room to maneuver, took aim and fired a shot at this thing's arm, causing it to scream and retract. The others around went into this kind of blood frenzy of screams and noises. The big alpha comes over, picks up the entire log and shakes it violently, causing me to flat against the ground, cracking my knee. It hurt like hell. I'm so pumped full of adrenaline now I could hardly feel it, but my ability to walk or stand is now so limited, but I knew I had to in order to survive what was to come. I pull myself up while these things are looking at me like a meal they haven't ever had before. I turned in fire. The rest of my bullets of these things, which didn't even seem to do anything. I run for my life now, they're even more pissed. I'm lost. I have no idea where I am or how to get back home. I just keep running as fast as I can and as fast as my wounded body will take me. These things are gaining on me fast, and due to my injury, I just end up dropping and falling down the steep hill toward the base of the small ravine, ending up landing in a small dried up creek bed. Island was a thud at the base of this ravine. I was out of breath and could not get back up if I tried. I accepted that this was the end. This was my fate. My leg was in excruciating pain, shaking, trembling. It's like what was happening in slow motion, but yet too fast to react normally. I felt my body beginning to shut down in this consciousness, and I tried everything in my power to keep myself awake. I looked down at my knee and I'm bleeding pretty severely. I didn't realize this in that moment, but that fall had actually torn several ligaments and gashed open my knee on top of the fact that it was already shattered. I can now hear these things coming down the hill slowly. It's like this entire time they weren't even trying to chase me. They were letting me wear myself out like an advanced, intelligent predator does to its prey before finally descending upon their kill. I get on my back and I'm trying to push myself, so I throw myself back on my stomach and I'm trying to crawl and I crawl. I can't get up, so crawling is the only way I'm getting out of here. As I'm crawling, one of these things gets in front of my path and starts coming towards me in a very slow, easy pace, like a ha-ha. I got you now, like a wolf that's found a lone sheep in a field all alone, as if it knows I can't get away and it just wants to toy with me for a while. It gets closer, and the nearer it got, I could feel my heartbeat racing out of control. I guess you would explain, realizing that my end was now. I was only mere moments away from death. I finally reached back to my holster, pulled out my sidearm, the last one. The thing stopped right in front of me as I'm sitting there, lying there, looking it dead in the eyes. It just reaches down, starts to tear into my flesh with its claws. The pain was excruciating, but I was not gonna let this thing beat me. I tried to fire at this thing while it was tearing into my flesh, but there were no more bullets and it smacked my revolver out of my hand, so I reached down, and in this moment I forgot all about it. I usually keep a Bowie knife always strapped to my lower leg. I had forgotten all about it until this very moment. This thing took its arm and held out my body and was about to go in for the bite that was going to tear my stomach open. I reached down and in one fluid motion and impales my entire knife into this thing's eye socket. It immediately let go of me and let out this scream like I never heard before. It shot out this green ooze like blood but thicker. It nearly collapsed, but retreated back up the hillside where I could all hear these things hissing and screaming, now bleeding, a shattered knee, and who knows whatever other injuries I accrued during this. I tried to crawl out as much as I possibly could after hearing these things, staying off in the distance. The screaming never stopped. I think I climbed hundreds of feet in my state. The only way I was staying alert was the sheer amount of adrenaline pumping through me, keeping me cautious. But I knew even that wouldn't last forever. I finally made it to the top of the small hill and I could see this old service road just a few 100 feet down. I almost got there in time, but I ended up passing out from blood loss. The next thing I know, I'm waking up on my back with EMTs trying to bring me back to life. I can remember everything that had happened. I was covered in blood. They asked me how it happened and I told them a bear had chased me down. I was not about to say anything about what really happened. Somebody who still doesn't know had seen me lying unconscious on the other side of the road, called for an ambulance I had come to when they were trying to revive me. I had lost a lot of blood and was near death. I was pretty badly banged up. I remained somewhat awake through their examination and kept slipping in and out of consciousness after I was taking in. The last thing I remember before passing out was them asking if there were any other people up there. It's like I couldn't even speak the whole time to this whole ordeal. I was pretty badly messed up and I spent a fair amount of time in the hospital being patched up. I have been asked over and over what had happened and I had to give my same story about how a bear had attacked me. I mean, come on, I knew they were not going to believe had I told them what really had happened when I was finally let out of the hospital. I had injured my knee worse than initially thought. It took quite a bit of physical therapy to bring myself back to normal and months of intense healing and therapy. I couldn't even get out of bed without a crutch or a crane. I did, however, gradually start to get better and could walk again after about a year. But today I still have to use a cane for walking long distances. My knee still bothers me from time to time. I can't run anymore. At least not like I used to, and I still feel that I'm a bit slower than before, but the whole time I went through this ordeal, it really opened my eyes to what's going on around us and what we don't realize is going on. We all just go on about our everyday lives not knowing that creatures like this really do exist. We never stopped to look around and see what's really around us. Nature is cruel, and it will kick you while you're down. I never go into the woods without some way to defend myself. I know there are things out there that could easily kill an unarmed person like me if they wanted to, and even worse than them. There are things out there that I'm sure are way worse. I have no desire to see them. I've seen things now that are out there that I don't think many other people have before, at least that are documented. It's been almost 20 years now since this happened. But I still think about it and how lucky I was to get out of there without getting killed every day. I see the memories in my head and wonder what would have happened. Had I not made it to that service road when I did, I would have never made it to the hospital, or if I hadn't even climbed up the hill, I could have lost consciousness for good. I've since gone back out into those woods again. Since this has all happened with a different sense of renewed vigor and awareness. I know to trust my surroundings a little differently than before. Plus, since my injury, I can't move the way I used to. If there's one thing I can leave you with, it's that you need to be very hyper aware of what's going on around you at all times. You never know what's out there in the woods waiting.